Spencer, who needs no introduction. As you'll read his comments in the front of my new book, St. Peter's Bones, which is about the persecuted church in Iraq, which will soon be available at Amazon.com and bookstores. Robert is the author of many books on Islam. One of his books, we were talking about this earlier, The Truth About Muhammad, published by Regnery, is probably the single best primer on Islam that has ever been read in any language that I've ever read. And as I was writing this book, which deals with the origins of Islam, there's a secret book discovered by U.S. Special Forces in Iraq, and it turns out it was written in Aramaic, and it's the diary of Bahira, a Nestorian monk in the 6th century who, in fact, discovered the young boy who became known as Muhammad at the age of 12 around a campfire outside Damascus with a camel caravan. And in his diary, he talks about trying to educate this young boy who was then known as Abu Qasim. I was reading the original Muslim text to make sure I got the story right. And I would go back and read Ibn Ishaq's Life of Muhammad, which is the original book, the first and the original source on the life of Muhammad. And then I'd be reading Robert's The Truth About Muhammad at the same time, and I'd say, gee, why am I spending all this time going through Ibn Ishaq's 800-page book when Robert actually did all that reading for me, got all the important parts, and he's footnoted every bit of it, and every single one of those footnotes is completely accurate, and you could cross-check the page numbers that Robert puts in his footnote back to Ibn Ishaq. So Robert, it's an honor and pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction. I often actually have said that I read the Quran so you don't have to. And that is indeed what this is really all about. And we should be very clear about that, not just to pick on Muslims or Islam, but to know clearly and fully what we're dealing with, and then to come to some kind of a cogent understanding of what we must do about it. We cannot possibly solve this problem or manage this problem adequately if we don't even understand what kind of problem it is we're facing. And so we've heard a lot of things today. We've heard about the church that Ashraf was talking about that was halted, construction in Egypt, and then a mosque is going up right next door. We heard about Sekina Ashtiani, who is facing stoning to death in Iran. We heard about Pamela mentioning that the Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf of the Ground Zero Mosque Initiative says one thing in English and another thing in Arabic. We heard about people facing death for leaving Islam. We heard about several states where the Muslim police do not protect Christians when they are brutalized by Muslims. Now, every one of those things and more, and pretty much everything you have heard today about how Christians and others are being victimized in Islamic states and majority Muslim countries is because of the teachings of the Quran and Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, without exception. Ashraf mentioned At-Tawbah 29, and in case that hasn't come up yet on your Memorize a Verse of the Quran Every Day calendar, that is chapter 9 of the Quran, verse 29, and it says this: fight those who do not believe in Allah or the last day, or do not believe in Allah or His messenger, nor forbid what He has forbidden, and even if they are of the people of the book, which is the Quran's designation for primarily Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya, which is a tax, that's what the word means in Arabic, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So in other words, Muslims are commanded in the book that they believe is the supreme and perfect eternal word of the supreme God, commanded to fight hot war against Jews and Christians until those Jews and Christians either obey Allah and His messenger, that is, become Muslims, or pay this tax that is religion-based and feel themselves subdued with willing submission. In other words, they must accept a situation in which it is a matter of legal force that they do not enjoy equality of rights with Muslims. And this became the basis for an elaborate system of laws that are considered to be the laws of God, the laws of Allah, that mandate discrimination against Jews and Christians. Why did the church get halted in Egypt? Because in the classic laws for the dhimmis, the people who submit and feel themselves subdued under Islamic law, they are not allowed to build new houses of worship. And so even though Egypt is not technically an Islamic republic, the laws of Islam are a cultural hangover that are still in force in a de facto way all around the Islamic world. And so they try to build a church, they can't build a church. The Constitution of Kuwait guarantees religious freedom. And so there was a man there in the 90s, Hussein Kambar Ali, who converted from Islam to Christianity, and he's immediately arrested and put on trial for his life because Muhammad said, if anybody changes his religion, kill him. And this is the basis for Islamic law mandating a death penalty for apostates from Islam. So Hussein Kambar Ali, or Robert Hussein as he began to call himself after his conversion to Christianity, he said, wait a minute, you're putting me on trial, but the Kuwaiti Constitution guarantees freedom of religion. The Kuwaiti Constitution doesn't say anything about Islamic law for apostates. And the prosecutor said, yes, with regret, I must acknowledge that what the defendant is saying is true. But God's law, Allah's law, is higher than Kuwaiti law and always has force and precedent over it. And we saw the same thing in Afghanistan when Abdurrahman was put on trial, another apostate from Islam to Christianity, convert from Islam to Christianity, in 2005 under the America-backed Karzai government. And the spokesman for the State Department said he was very nervous. It was a remarkable press conference to see. He said, I would just like to remind the Karzai government that the Afghan constitution, the one that the Americans had fought to put into force in Afghanistan, guarantees the freedom of religion. And the Karzai government, the America-backed Karzai government, responded, of course the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, but, and they pointed to another clause in that same Constitution, all within the parameters of what is permitted in Islam. And so you remember Henry Ford, and you can have any color car you want as long as it's black. Well, you can have any religion you want in Afghanistan as long as it's Islam. And that's freedom of religion. Because, after all, Islam, as we also heard, is the perfect religion, and so how could you possibly allow somebody to convert from what is perfect to what is imperfect? Because, here again, the Quran tells us that Judaism and Christianity are actually, you know, you may have heard, actually, I should preface this by saying, you have probably heard imams like Faisal Abdul Rauf on television saying that we respect Jews and Christians, and we revere Moses and Jesus and the rest of them as prophets. And we have nothing but the highest regard for all these traditions of Judaism and Christianity. Have you heard things like that? Yeah, well, he was lying. And this is how he was lying. He was lying by not telling you the whole story. In the Quran, chapter 3, verse 67, it says that the Jews and Christians argue about Abraham. And they say Abraham was Jewish, Abraham was Christian, neither of them know anything. Abraham was a Muslim. Now how could Abraham be a Muslim when Abraham lived several thousand years before Muhammad? Well, this is how. The original religion is Islam. And all those prophets that you know of as the biblical prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus himself, for Christians, all the prophets of the Hebrew and Christian scriptures are all Muslim prophets who taught Islam. They taught the same thing Muhammad taught. Now, how is it then that Judaism and Christianity don't teach the same thing as Islam? Because, you see, the wicked followers of Moses and Jesus twisted their Islamic teachings to create these false religions, to hijack these wonderful, beautiful prophetic teachings that were Islamic, and created Judaism and Christianity. So they are perversions of the original Islamic teachings of Moses and Jesus and Noah and David and Abraham and all the rest of them. And so when they tell you, see, that they respect the prophets of the Bible, they don't mean the prophets of the Bible. They mean the Muslim pod people prophets that they put up in their place, that have the same names. And actually, it's a supremacist declaration that completely delegitimizes Judaism and Christianity. And because they believe then that Judaism and Christianity are these illegitimate, satanic forms of the original teachings that came from these wonderful Muslim prophets, the Jews and the Christians have to submit to the rule of the Muslims, or else they will be punished in this life as well as in the next.